Yesterday was New York City's Democratic mayoral primary, and former Governor Andrew Cuomo conceded to State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani. On the bright side for Cuomo, at least he doesn't have to move to New York City. During his concession speech, Cuomo said that Mamdani put together a great campaign and added, quote, he touched young people and inspired them and got them to come out and vote. Cuomo's mistake was waiting until after he was elected to touch young people.
Welcome to Gaslit Nation's bonus show. I'm your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, the film the Kremlin doesn't want you to see, so be sure to watch it. As NATO wrapped up its summit this week in the Netherlands, the Gaslit Nation bonus show is going to look at how to contain the threat of Russian genocidal imperialism. For that, we are continuing our important conversation with Candace Rondeaux, a veteran war correspondent and fluent Russian speaker who has reported from major global conflicts, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Ukraine, and the Caucasus. A Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, Rondeaux covered 9/11 for the New York Daily News and the Virginia Tech massacre for the Washington Post. She directs Future Frontlines and the Planetary Politics Initiative at New America and teaches at Arizona State University. She holds degrees from Sarah Lawrence, NYU, and Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, and is a leading expert on the future of warfare, democracy, and global security. We are going to talk about, can Russia's genocidal imperialism, which is aligned with some of the worst, all the bad dictatorships on this planet, can it be contained? And for insight on that, we're also going to touch on her new book, Putin's Sledgehammer, where she unpacks how a brutal private army rose from the underworld to challenge the very heart of the Russian state. And that is, of course, Wagner, or Wagner, however you want to say it. And 2 years ago, this month, was the famous mutiny by Prigozhin, and we talked about that in part one of our conversation, which I will link to in the show notes. But first, a few words on the NATO summit. The big headline is that NATO members agreed to finally meet their 5% spending obligation, meaning each member will devote 5% of their GDP annually on defense and security spending by 2035, except for Spain, which is working to negotiate a carve-out, as they say they will not be ready to meet that deadline. Trump has long pushed for all NATO members meeting this goal and threatened Spain with tariffs, even though as a member of the EU, Spain does not have individual trade agreements outside of the EU trade deals. Does Trump get credit for NATO finally agreeing to meet its spending obligations? No, they're doing this because of Russia. How do we know this? Because Europe is consumed with ensuring Ukraine gets all the defensive aid they need in their existential resistance against Russia, which is Europe's resistance. EU leaders have said they want to ensure that Ukraine is a porcupine. Ukraine's staunchest allies across Europe, including Denmark, have emptied out their own military to rush and get Ukraine everything it needs onto the front line. So they need to refill their military, and they need to all be united so they have plenty of stock on hand, not just for themselves, but also to give to Ukraine. Because if Ukraine falls, Poland, the Baltic states are next. How do we know this? Russia has been saying for years that they're going to do to Ukraine what they're finally doing, and they're also making the same threats against Poland, the Baltic states, Germany, the UK, France, and on the list goes. And there's also reporting that Russian terrorism has led to explosions, like delivery planes. I will link to that reporting in the show notes. It's Russian terrorism. It's a Russian terrorist state. So yes, because of Russia, they are doing this. They're ramping up their defensive spending. So no, Trump does not get credit for this. But what about all the flattery by NATO members to Trump that's being reported in the press? The answer is, this time around, European leaders know how to manage Trump. They downplayed Ukraine during this NATO summit, not because Ukraine is less of a priority, but as not to provoke Trump. Clearly, that's what's going on. They're being strategic. In 2024, a journalist friend met with a NATO official in Brussels and asked if they were prepared for Trump to possibly come back to power. And that official confidently answered, "We are ready." NATO is just doing what Macron, the president of France, is good at doing, making insecure Trump think he's getting his way, when in reality, you're meeting your larger objective, strengthening Europe's defenses. Remember, Trump's demand that NATO meet the 5% spending obligation was not a demand, but part of his larger attacks against the alliance and threats of pulling the US out of the alliance. He sounded like Kremlin disinformation when he would shout about this back in 2017, not like a statesman concerned about international security. So really, this NATO summit can be seen as a European allies playing Trump like a fiddle, and everyone, including Ukraine, getting what they want: stronger, united defense against Russia. And once again, Russia's useful idiot in the White House backfires on them. Trump is too stupid and vain to know he's being played because he likes the attention and flattery. That's what makes him such an easy mark, whether for the Russians or anyone else trying to get their way. Now, before we begin our main discussion, I want to comment on the euphoric victory for the working class, unions, working families, sexual assault survivors, immigrants, and all democracy-loving people, and that is the victory of Zoran Mamdani, a victory for all Americans. New York is a front line of the struggle for progress for America. Abolition was fought for in New York, women's rights, the gay revolution, and now the struggle against Trump and his ICE Gestapo. Here are 5 things to know about Zoran Mamdani's victory in the Democratic Party primary for New York City mayor. And whoever wins this primary is essentially the new mayor. So he's basically won. I mean, barring some crazy event, which could still happen because it's 2025. But here are 5 things to know. Number 1, unity wins. One of the first things a Mamdani advisor did was thank Brad Lander on social media for his extraordinary campaign, for spending Brad Lander's campaign money attacking Cuomo and working hard with his team in those final weeks to get out the vote. Lander and Mamdani had no ego, only shared values, and made sure those values got across the finish line through a joint endorsement, which produced one of the cutest campaign videos ever, which I'll link to in the show notes. Now, everyone wants them to do a buddy comedy. It was that well done. The great news is that if you voted number 1 for Brad Lander, as I did, he is an ally of Mamdani. Lander is going to be instrumental in helping shape policy in the city, working with this administration. It's a win-win and an urgent reminder to progressives: we must unite or die. And revolutions have to be fun. Watch their endorsement video to see how these 2 leaders genuinely like each other and clearly had a lot of fun supporting one another. That is how we win. Number 2, corrupt criminal Eric Adams and his deeply corrupt administration have been at open war with New York City Council. It's been incredibly demoralizing for city council members. Now, New York City Council has an energetic ally in the mayor's office. That means they can work together to get some landmark legislation done to make New York a model city for quality of life. That is incredibly exciting. The level of power now that is concentrated in the hands of progressives in our city. And the world is looking to them. America is looking to them. They must succeed. Who is going to try to stop them? That gets us to number 3. Fox News and the rest of the far-right disinformation machine is going to wage psychological warfare on New Yorkers and the rest of the country, trying to convince you that now through Election Day in November, that New York is a dying city full of crime and chaos. I live in New York City. I take the subway at random hours of the day, including late at night. It is a vibrant city full of people of all ages, full of tourists. If New York City is dead, then it's impossible to kill. The city is so pulsing with life, and it's inspiring to see. I just love being on the streets of New York. It's also a wonderful place to live and raise a family. Brooklyn is all families now. Our public schools are strong. Obviously, they need a lot more support and services. All schools do, and all teachers deserve that. But New York is a great place to live, a family, raise a family. But Fox News, on behalf of their oligarchy, they need Zoran Mamdani to fail. Like Putin needs Ukraine with its democracy and better quality of life than in Russia to fail. It's never been more important, therefore, to protest Fox News. You can do that by joining Rise and Resist every Tuesday at Fox News to protest their divisive, destructive disinformation. It's the same weapon that the Kremlin uses against democracies around the world. Look for a link in the show notes on how to join those protests every Tuesday. And that is done, again, by Rise and Resist, that group is doing extraordinary work. From the Tesla takedown protests to No King's Day and beyond, they are the real deal. One of their organizers, Julie, joins our Gaslit Nation salons on Monday at 4 p.m. regularly. They're doing extraordinary work, and I love them. Thank you for being out there. So if you believe in Zoran Mamdani, if you want to see his administration succeed and see New York City become a model of what democracy can look like in improving people's lives, just like in other social democracies like the Scandinavian states, where they have really strong social safety nets. As part of that effort, show up to those Fox News Tuesdays with Rise and Resist. Number 4, the NYPD gets over $10 billion annually. That's a budget that's more than half of the entire military of Mexico. The NYT budget is massive. Zoran Mamdani and groups like Working Families Party that endorsed him want to allocate some of that to social workers and other services. New York City does not have a crime problem. It has a mental health problem, a cost of living problem. By investing money into social programs, strengthening the social safety net, that will lift more people out of poverty and reduce crime. Study after study has shown. Invest in the minds of the people and you have a happier, safer society. A study out of Denmark just supported that finding as well. I'll link to it in the show notes. Republicans are terrified of this. So again, they're going to use all sorts of scare tactics, including that wealth will leave the city. New data from the State Revenue Alliance and the Institute for Policy Studies found that increased taxes on the rich actually increased the number of millionaires in those states and expanded wealth for all people. Taxing the rich works for everybody, including the rich. They benefit from a stronger, better funded state too. Number 5, last but not least, I am shocked to learn that Zoran Mamdani is the son of Mira Nair, the director who did Monsoon Wedding. She is a masterclass in filmmaking. How am I just now learning that this is her son? I think that's really interesting. The first Muslim mayor of New York City is the son of one of the greatest known female filmmakers of all time. I am still processing this, so we will continue this thread at another time. All right, everyone, remember, people power works, unity works, authentic candidates led by their values work. The Democratic Party needs to embrace this new direction because people's lives depend on it, as does our democracy. More on this in our summer series on bashing the oligarchy, bashing the patriarchy, because they're the same thing. Now, on to our main discussion with future of warfare and international security expert Candace Rondeaux, author of the new book, Putin's Sledgehammer, on how to contain Russian genocidal imperialism, because the fascists won't stop until they are stopped. To listen to this full bonus show, be sure to subscribe to Gaslit Nation on Patreon. Discounted annual memberships are available, and you can give the gift of membership. Sign up at patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.
Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who is your friend, he called you daddy earlier. Do you regard your NATO allies as kind of children.
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No.
Do you
He did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
The daddy thing, I didn't call him daddy. What I said is that sometimes in Europe, I hear sometimes countries saying, hey Mark, will the US stay with us? And I said, that sounds a little bit like a small child asking his daddy, hey, are you still staying with the family? So in that sense, I use daddy.
I want to ask you a philosophical question about all of this. And you speak about sort of the religious fervor of, the Viking symbolism, the ancient pagan symbolism, the Nazi symbolism, which is ironic because Russia's victory with the Allies is like a religion in Russia, which, that huge celebration that Putin just hosted, bringing together world leaders, like that is like a religious holiday in Russia and Russian nationalism. Where do you see in terms of and given how widely praised Wagner is across Russian society and just the fervor, the patriotism, where do you see this in terms of what should we, how do I say this? After Putin's gone, it's not just a matter of Putin dying and this all goes away. It's something much deeper. Could you explain that to people, like the psychology behind this? Like the Russians aren't going to be satisfied staying in Russia. Like when they talk on Russian state TV about we're going to go to Poland and the Baltics, they really mean that because the atrocities we see playing out in Ukraine, that started with their genocidal hate speech on Russian state TV. Before they were launching missiles at Kiev, they were threatening to launch missiles at Kiev for years leading up to that. So could you speak about the deeper psychology here when it comes to what we're up against when it comes to Russian genocidal imperialism globally?
So the number one takeaway is that it's not just Vladimir Putin that is committed to forever war on Russia's behalf. It's thousands of people who are, and maybe millions, who are committed to that idea. Putin's success is in recasting, the terms of the deal when it comes to the world order. He has, with Wagner's help, completely erased all of the boundaries to, using military force to commit atrocities. He's done that in the open. Nobody has ever held Putin or anybody below him, who would be responsible for those acts to account. To this day, only, one Wagner commander who was, active in 2014, 2015 has been convicted, and that was in Finland. So the takeaway here is that Russia, for now and maybe for years to come, is committed to a forever war with the West. And what that looks like is, one, empowering a paramilitary that is really like an organized crime cartel to operate across Africa in conflict situations, maraud and loot for gold, for diamonds, for timber, and sell it on the black market for a profit in order to prop up the Russian economy, right? That's one piece of it. Another piece that we see is this evolution of the Wagner Group from kind of, this band of brothers and mercenaries to a brand for Russia's irregular warfare in Poland, in France, in Germany, where you see the hand and the branding of Wagner and the signature on arsons in Poland, on arsons in the UK, on sabotage attacks on IKEAs in Lithuania. So Russia is really showing that it is willing to go even further. And it's not even doing so in a kind of quiet or subtle way. There's no way to explain 30, 40 different fires and then incendiary devices going off on cargo planes other than to point to Russia at this stage, and all the evidence does. So these evolutions that we're seeing are, one, showing that Russia is still, I think, on a conventional level, hobbled by its lack of, simple bodies, right? They don't have enough men. We know that because they're importing North Koreans and now apparently Chinese. We know that because they're paying contract fighters who are affiliated with Wagner-like paramilitaries, 3 times the normal salary of an average Russian officer or soldier. We know that there's a desperation to mobilize forces, and they just don't have the manpower. And yet they also know that the will of the West is divided, and that they have succeeded in dividing Europe on the question of the future of the transatlantic alliance. They have succeeded in breaking the United States away from this longstanding alliance as well. And so in some ways, Putin's theory of the case is that he can outlast and Russia can outlast the unified will of the West. And he may be right if we don't figure out how to respond to this current moment.